When I say the name Albert Einstein, what picture pops into your head? I bet for most of us, it's that iconic image, right? The wild hair, those kind twinkling eyes, basically the face of the ultimate genius.
His name has literally become a synonym for the word. He's this huge icon of our age, a symbol of just mind-blowing brilliance. But the story of the man who completely redefined our universe? Well, it's way more surprising and, honestly, a lot more human than the legend would have you believe.
So that brings up the big question. What does it actually take to change the world? Is it just some kind of effortless genius? Or is it something else, something grittier? Okay, let's dive in and find out. First things first, let's just bust the biggest myth right out of the gate. You probably heard it, the story that Einstein failed math. Ripley's Believe It or Not even ran a column on it once. But when a friend showed it to them, Einstein just laughed. The reality? In his own words, I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus. So, yeah, myth busted. No, his struggles weren't with numbers at all. They were with people, with systems. You know, he was so slow to start speaking that his family's maid actually called him the dopey one. He was just a born nonconformist, and he absolutely hated rigid authority. He even called his teachers drill sergeants. And that rebellious streak, it made the academic world want absolutely nothing to do with him. Just look at this number, 9. 9 years. That is how long the man we now call a genius basically wandered in the professional wilderness after he graduated. For 9 straight years, all he faced were rejections and closed doors before he could land even a junior professor job. In fact, he was the only graduate in his entire class who wasn't offered a position. Can you imagine that? He felt totally alone, like a complete outcast from the very establishment he was about to turn completely upside down. This isn't the story of some celebrated prodigy. It's the story of an underdog. So, what's a rejected genius supposed to do? Well, he gets a practical job. A friend helped him get a spot as a third-class technical examiner at the Swiss Patent Office. On the surface, it looked like a total dead end. But it was right there, in that quiet government building, that the revolution really began. Because in 1905, in his spare time, this patent clerk published 4 papers that just shattered the foundations of physics. First, he came out with what he called a very revolutionary idea, that light could act like a particle. Then he followed it up with a paper that finally figured out the true size of atoms. His third paper proved atoms even exist by explaining the random jittery motion of particles. And his fourth, that was just a complete rethinking of space and time itself, the special theory of relativity. And as if that wasn't enough for 1 year, a few months later, he published a tiny little addendum. It was a simple consequence of his new theory, and it gave us what has to be the most famous equation in the entire world. E equals mc squared. But he wasn't done. Oh no. A decade later, he decided to take on gravity. He showed that it isn't some weird, mysterious force pulling things together. Instead, big objects warp the very fabric of space-time, and that curve is what we feel as gravity. The classic analogy is perfect. Picture a bowling ball on a trampoline. Smaller balls roll towards it, right? Not because of a force, but because they're just following the curve. That, right there, is general relativity. His colleague, the physicist Max Born, called it the greatest feat of human thinking about nature. The humble patent clerk was now the most famous scientist on the planet. But as you can imagine, that kind of fame, it came with a pretty steep price. Publicly, he was an absolute icon, hanging out with movie stars like Charlie Chaplin. But privately, the non-stop attention was a kind of torture for him. He was just buried in letters, and once wrote to a friend, "I dream I'm burning in hell, and the postman is the devil eternally roaring at me." His relationships were just as complex. His first wife, Maliva Maric, was a brilliant physicist herself. She was his intellectual partner. He even told friends, "She solves all the mathematical problems for me." His second wife, Elsa, played a totally different role. She was the manager, the protective gatekeeper who handled all the worldly stuff so he could just retreat into his own thoughts whenever he was seized with a problem. And here is the great, fascinating irony of Einstein's life. The quantum theory that he helped kickstart back in 1905, it grew into a whole new kind of physics based on probability and uncertainty. And the ultimate scientific rubble, he couldn't accept it. The idea that the universe, at its core, was based on chance was just intolerable to him. It's why he famously said God does not play dice. And that, right there, is the central paradox of his life. Einstein's rebellious, nonconformist spirit was the very thing that let him overthrow centuries of physics. But that same stubbornness, that same deep faith in his own intuition, is what made him resist the next scientific revolution, one that he himself helped get started. His biographer, Walter Isaacson, just nails it. He says Einstein's life is a testament to the connection between creativity and freedom. The freedom to question, to imagine, to dissent. And this whole idea of fighting against dogma, that's something Einstein saw in his own hero. In the end, Einstein really saw himself in Galileo. He wrote that Galileo's life was about the passionate fight against any kind of dogma based on authority. And that was the core of Einstein's own genius. It really leaves us with a question, doesn't it? How often does true innovation require not just being brilliant, but also having the profound, fearless courage to be an outsider?